Now, the Corolla Cross is a car that we recommend quite highly on the channel on its basis that it offers excellent practicality, incredible efficiency, while still having the reliability and durability of a Toyota badge. However, if, like you think that car might be a bit too boring to drive, they have a GR Sport model now. Now, some of you might be wondering why we are taking the Corolla Cross GR Sport again for another review, and that's because they have actually facelifted this vehicle, which means as part of the larger, wider Corolla Cross update, the Corolla Cross GR Sport has also seen a revision as well. So in addition to the new headlights and the new taillights, the Corolla Cross GR Sport actually gets a few other unique revisions. So for example, the wings that used to stretch out into the side are now done up in body color, with this grille now aping similarly to what we've seen before on the Toyota Veloz. Moving further down, as you can see, they've actually moved the fog lights up here instead of where it sits further down on the non-GR Sport model, and this entire front bumper has also been redesigned in order to make this car look a little bit more aggressive. The headlights themselves, however, remain shared with the regular non-GR Sport model, and so they are relatively dark with scrolling indicators up here and a lowered daytime running light signature instead. Similarly to before, there are no changes under the bonnet, which means that lifting up this hood will reveal a 1.8-litre naturally aspirated engine running the Atkinson cycle, which means that the combustion cycle is a little bit longer, extracting a little bit more power, which produces on its own a mere 98 PS and 142 Newton meters. However, that is augmented by an electric motor, which in and of itself produces 72 PS and 163 Newton meters of torque. Now, Toyota doesn't actually disclose the total torque number of the system altogether. However, the total power output is 122 PS, which is significant for a vehicle like this, particularly given the fact the Corolla Cross is not that heavy. Now, down the side, the changes are also relatively minimal. We now get a new set of alloy wheel design, still 18 inches in diameter with a diamond cut finish and still wrapped in Toyo Proxys tires, which are a combination that I have no issue with. One thing that has changed, however, is the fact that for the Corolla Cross GR Sport HEV, yes, that's its full name, you now get the two-tone roof as standard, which means that no matter which body color you get, be it this white, the blue, or the red, you will now get a black contrast roof one way or another. In addition to that, you now get GR Sport badging here as well as HEV badging here, because this is, after all, a Corolla Cross GR Sport HEV, so don't forget it. And more importantly, as you see down the side of this car, it still does look pretty good. The Corolla Cross has actually been in our market for quite some time now, but still, to this day, this car still looks fighting fresh, replete with its sort of double C design here and at the front, making the wheel arches look a little bit more flared, as well as the very clean side profile and this piece of black garnish here, which says Corolla Cross. One thing that I would like to point out is the fact that although these roof rails are painted, they are functional, although I don't imagine anyone would use them. But these vents here, these are optional extras, which means that if you are like me and you cannot stand the look of them, be sure to tell your dealer when you buy the car that you do not want them installed, no matter how much they insist. Now, one of the reasons why no one would use a roof box on a Corolla Cross is because even in this hybrid model, you get a whole lot of space. Once the noisy boot opens, you will find more than enough space back here for 5 people's worth of luggage. And on top of that, in addition to all of this space, there is also space underneath the boot floor where you will find a space-saver spare wheel, which means that you are not compromising in any way. The reason for this is because Toyota has been quite smart in terms of packaging. And that's because the hybrid battery of this car actually lives underneath the rear seats. And as a result, there is no practical compromise to this car. And the rear seats still fold 60/40 for added practicality. Now, once I do shut this noisy tailgate, that brings me onto some of the visual changes at the rear of the car. As you can see, we now get clear lens taillights for the Corolla Cross GR Sport, which actually utilize the internals from the pre-facelift model. If you look very closely, the design of these taillights are a little bit different compared to the non-GR Sport model. Now you know. The other thing that's been changed is also this rear bumper, because this used to have a weird sort of scalloping to it that looked very busy and very fussy. Now it's a cleaner sort of vented look, which I think does make the back end of this car look a little bit better. One thing that I would like to point out is the fact the Corolla Cross GR Sport does not gain any additional spoiler up here. This is the same spoiler that you get in the regular models, and as far as I'm concerned, you could argue that it looks a little bit incomplete, but to me, I think that it does serve the Corolla Cross GR Sport well, because ultimately GR Sport models are meant to balance between the practicality of a Toyota while still feeding that enthusiastic driving bent, which means that maybe a buyer of a car like this wouldn't want a big garish spoiler on the back, because if they did, they'd buy a Proton X50. Now, as you can see, the interior of the Corolla Cross GR Sport is very stylish, but not stylish enough to have a sunglasses holder. Now, the thing about the GR Sport models is, as I said, they're meant to sort of balance the practicality and livability of a Toyota while still offering a little bit more driver engagement. And so that understanding or that focus is exactly what's driven a lot of the changes in this interior. So for example, you still get soft touch material here and you still get soft touch material up here on the doors. But you now get red stitching on the dash, you also get red stitching on the doors, and you get more red stitching on the center console as well as on the seat itself. In fact, even your seat belts are now done up in red like you get on a Mercedes AMG. However, the practical aspects still remain the same, which means that ultimately this is a very livable interior. So for example, you have a couple of cup holders here, wireless charging pad, decently sized door bins, big enough for a 1.5 litre size bottle. You get a well-damped glove box here, but it's not lined in felt, but you know, small thing, especially given the fact that this car is now more affordable than the outgoing model. You also get a little bit of space underneath the center console where you will find a 12-volt socket and you can get it to finally stand up after a while. There's a joke there somewhere. But anyway, this interior does feel quite nice if you ask me, because the major touch points have been well addressed. So for example, if you have bought a Corolla Cross GR Sport Hybrid, you'll appreciate the fact that you have a slightly sportier steering wheel with red stitching here, a GR Sport badge here where it didn't used to be, just like what you get on proper GR models. And even these seats have also been redesigned in terms of their upholstery, where you now get perforations in the centers as well as this sort of microfiber type strip right in the middle, as well as GR badging embossed on the headrest, which I think really does make this car look and feel a little bit more sporty, a little bit more racy. Now, beyond that, of course, you still get this larger central infotainment screen. The engine has just kicked on, where it does work decently well and it is quite responsive, but it's a very clunky thing. And the annoying thing is, because it's so big, it actually blocks some of your visibility outward. So for example, if I were to set up this seat any lower, this would actually take away the view of the front left corner of the car. More annoyingly is, once I switch on Android Auto, as you'll see, the acreage here is quite small when you're in this sort of default setting, which means that whenever I drive cars, whenever I drive vehicles that are fitted with this head unit, I have to end up sort of just doing that in order to actually get a usable view of my Waze directions. Now, in terms of ergonomics, getting into this car, everything looks and feels and works the way you'd expect it to. Getting into a comfortable driving position is also very easy because the driver's seat is not only powered, but you also get base angle adjustment, which is something that a lot of Chinese car makers still haven't figured out yet, but Toyota has. More importantly, this steering wheel is also very adjustable in terms of reach and rake, which means that it's very easy to get into a comfortable driving position. And once you do, you'll be able to enjoy the fact that, again, the controls are very sensibly laid out. It's very easy for you to set your temperature or your fan speed. Your stalks do stalk-like things, and there are actual buttons on the steering wheel that control all the major functions. And at no point will this car confuse you in terms of how to use it, which I think sounds small, but it makes a really big difference. Other things I appreciate in this car include the fact that they come as standard with a dash cam. All new Toyotas come with a dash cam, I think, up once you buy past, I think, 100,000 ringgit. And you also get an electrochromic rear view mirror here, which is always nice at this price point, because it does mean that when you're taking in a long trip, especially at night, you're not going to be blinded by glare from vehicles behind you. The only cons that I find about this cabin are the fact that the dash top, for example, is very hard plastic. So is the plastic around my knees. But then again, you could argue that this is meant to be harder wearing. The dash top, for example, needs to be a slightly tougher material so it doesn't crack in the heat. And this is a panel that might get smashed a lot, which means that when you have a slightly harder wearing material here, maybe it'll last longer. Perhaps. But I'm pretty sure I've just bruised my knee just demonstrating that. But whatever. It's a Corolla Cross GR Sport. It's good. Now in the back of the Corolla Cross GR Sport, again the niceties continue, because again you have more red stitching here, as well as your red seat belts, if I can find them here, which means that again it just feels a little bit more racy, a little bit more sporty compared to the non-GR Sport model. In terms of practicality, we have cup holders here, which is always nice, as well as smaller pockets here, as well as a deployable center armrest here with a couple more cup holders. There are no pockets behind the back of the driver's seat, but there is one behind the passenger seat, and of course you get a set of crotch coolers, beneath which you will find a couple of USB-C ports, which is always nice to see. Now, one thing about the Corolla Cross Hybrid in general, not just this GR Sport, is the fact that the batteries live underneath the bench of the rear seat, which means that the seat itself is actually positioned quite high. The benefit of this is the fact that you do have very good under-thigh support, thanks to the fact that, again, the seat is mounted quite high, so it's very comfortable for you to sit. The floor is not flat, but the hump in the middle is decent enough that if you do have a passenger sat in the middle, it's not too bad, and there is plenty of space to tuck in my feet underneath the seat in front of me if I want to stretch out, which means that life back here is generally okay. Now, one of the things I would like to point out is the fact the Corolla Cross GR Sport, or the Corolla Cross in general in Malaysia, competes in the C segment, or it competes against C segment SUVs. Now, if you were to compare this car against vehicles like the Chery Tiggo Cross PHEV, or in fact the Proton X70 or the Honda CR-V, you will find that, for example, in terms of knee room, it is a little bit compromised, although headroom is generally quite okay. And the reason I bring this up is not just for adult passengers, but it's also in terms of carrying children. Because, for example, if you have a forward-facing child seat mounted in the ISOFIX mounts here, that's not too bad, but a bulky rear-facing child seat may end up pushing against the backs of the front seats, because the wheelbase of this car is not that long, and therefore the space clearance in the back is not that big. In addition to that, this door, for example, while it is of a decent size, this opening at least, it doesn't open to like a 90-degree angle. It's quite limited in terms of its opening angle, which means that getting a child seat in here might be a little bit more difficult than in other vehicles. However, in terms of adult passengers, like I said, it is pretty comfortable, and I can actually recline this rear seat if I want a slightly more relaxed seating position. But overall, I think that the back end of the Corolla Cross is exactly what you'd expect from a vehicle within this size class. It doesn't disappoint in any way, but more importantly, this is the Corolla Cross HEV GR Sport, or GR Sport HEV, depending on who you ask, which means that while we're very familiar with the Corolla Cross recipe, especially the Corolla Cross Hybrid, which we've already reviewed, the bigger question is, does this car justify its price premium based on the way it drives? Because there have been a few changes under the skin that you have to experience to understand. Now, one of the reasons why you'd buy a GR Sport model like this rather than a standard Corolla Cross Hybrid is for the GR Sport stuff. And the thing is, there are a lot of things that come with the GR Sport badge. Traditionally, the GR Sport models in the Toyota lineup tend to have reworked ECUs and transmission control units in order to help the car feel a little bit more agile, a bit more sprightly, and a bit more sporty. That is the name of the game here after all. However, with the Corolla Cross GR Sport, the changes are limited only to the ECU, mostly in terms of making the throttle feel a little bit more responsive, and in terms of the TCU is, again, in order to make that acceleration feel a little bit more brisk. One of the things that I've always appreciated about GR Sport models, be it the Vios GR Sport or in fact the Corolla Saloon GR Sport, is the fact that the reworked transmission control unit usually offers simulated or stepped gearing in order to make it feel like there's a typical torque converter, even though it still ultimately utilizes a CVT, and because Toyota is very good at that. However, in the Corolla Cross GR Sport, that hasn't been able to happen. I'm not entirely sure why that is. I suspect that it's because this car doesn't use a traditional CVT. Instead, it uses what Toyota calls an eCVT, which actually isn't a CVT gearbox in the way we understand it. It's not like a toothed belt in between two different spools. Instead, it's sort of like a planetary gear set. So because of the very, very significant hardware change there, it wasn't really possible for them to make this sensation of stepped gearing for this car. But ultimately, that is the only minor niggle. Everything else, however, has been faithfully looked at and faithfully breathed on by the engineers at Toyota in order to make this car feel like a proper GR Sport. So, among the many things that they've changed on this car includes things like revisions to the suspension, which now makes this car feel a little bit less floaty. Not that the Corolla Cross was ever really floaty, but now this feels a little bit more tuned in, as it were. better body control, slight compromise in terms of, your secondary ride, like riding over speed bumps and stuff like that. But overall, this is still a relatively comfortable affair, but more importantly, it feeds into that slightly more driver-focused bent. The steering wheel is also a little bit heavier, which you can tell from the moment you get in the car. But again, that's not really a complaint because it's still not exactly heavy, and it still sort of lightens up a little bit whenever you are driving at lower speeds in order to help improve sort of maneuverability when you're parking and stuff like that. And as I mentioned earlier, the throttle is now a little bit more responsive, it feels a little bit more alert, and the brakes are also now a little bit more alert as well. And as a result, all of this feeds into a much more improved driving experience for those who prioritize that sort of thing. Now, I'd like to first get the powertrain out of the way. Now, the Toyota HEV systems, or the Toyota hybrid electric vehicle systems, are very, very advanced hybrid systems. So they utilize a 1.8 litre naturally aspirated motor in this car, which runs the Atkinson cycle, which improves thermal efficiency up to about 40-something%, if I'm not mistaken, as opposed to 20-odd% that you get in a typical internal combustion motor. Now, in order to aid that, because Atkinson cycle engines traditionally have very, very weak torque low down, so in order to aid that, there is an electric motor that helps to drive the front wheels during moments of high torque demand. The benefit of this is that the engine will run at an optimized engine speed in order to maximize efficiency, and the electric motor assists where the engine might not necessarily be performing at its best. Like I mentioned, high torque demands during periods of heavy acceleration and when you're climbing hills, etc., then the electric motor there is to help augment the lack of torque being provided by the engine at relatively low speeds. Now, in the GR Sport application, you might not be too fussed thinking about efficiency because ultimately this is a GR Sport model. Your priority here might be more towards the driving experience in terms of the alertness of the powertrain, etc. And I can tell you that this is a very, very good setup. We haven't actually driven the Vios GR Sport yet, which is also available as a hybrid. So this is essentially my first experience in a hybrid GR Sport model. And I can say that this experience has largely been very positive. For starters, this powertrain again feels very, very alert. From the moment you hit the throttle, the car surges forward with a certain degree of alertness and agility because you have the electric motor responding almost immediately to throttle input. And as a result, this car feels like it's a lot more powerful than it might necessarily suggest. Yes, 111 PS I believe this car produces with no rated torque figure. But while that number might not seem like much, from behind the wheel, it feels like this car is again very attentive, very alert, and like this powertrain is pretty punchy. Now, the benefit of that is not only when you're accelerating from a standstill, but also when you're trying to merge into traffic or when you're overtaking, the car always feels like there is sufficient power in order to get anything that you want done, which is great. That's what you want. Now, the benefit of that is, as you can see, as I'm merging onto the motorway here, I've got all the torque that I need, which is always nice. And it does actually provide enough torque in order to get into this engine's natural torque band, which again also means that as you're driving along, it never feels that you're out of puff, it never feels that you're lacking torque. And more importantly, compared to the non-hybrid model, it also feels that there is more torque available to you in this setup compared to the pure combustion motor. So again, all of this helps to make this car feel like it's more powerful than the 1.8 litre might suggest. This is all very good. Now, when you do hit higher speeds, sort of like anywhere above about 30 to 40 kilometers an hour, then the engine will start to drive the wheels directly. And this handover process is incredibly smooth because it doesn't matter if you're using the electric motor or the internal combustion engine. All power that goes to the wheel still goes through the same ECVT planetary gear set. And as a result, the car manages to shift from one powertrain to the other very smoothly. It is imperceptible as the car hands it over. In fact, if you do not have the little graphic on the right showing you which powertrain is moving the wheels, which is something that I normally keep on because I quite like it, you really wouldn't know. All you know is the car is moving forward with urgency, which is all you really want, right? And the thing is that urgency does actually continue all the way up to motorway speeds, where again, despite the fact that this car runs an Atkinson cycle engine, it doesn't feel like it runs out of puff. You can maintain 110, 120 kilometers an hour without much issue at all. The car is quite happy to do that all day long. And because it's constantly sort of moving the power between the electric motor as well as the petrol engine, it means that, again, no matter what you're requesting of the car in terms of torque and acceleration, the car is always ready to respond. And because there is that electric motor to help augment the internal combustion engine, it means that fuel consumption remains very low. But I am getting ahead of myself. Now, one of the things that you will also notice once you get up to motorway speed, this is probably something that you might not notice during, say, a showroom test drive, is the fact that this reworked suspension really does give the Corolla Cross a certain degree of high-speed confidence. Now, the non-GR Sport model isn't exactly a bad car to drive over the motorway or over longer distances at higher speed, but of course that car is very clearly geared and focused on comfort, which means that when you're driving at higher speed, there is a certain lack of body control because Toyota wanted that car to feel a little bit more forgiving, a little bit more comfortable, as is in line with customer expectations of a non-GR Sport model. On top of that, they've been able to leave the best goodies, as it were, for this flagship GR Sport, such as the reworked suspension and the improved body control. And what that means is when you're driving at 110, 120 kilometers an hour, when the motorway curves, as it tends to in Malaysia, you will find that the Corolla Cross GR Sport does an excellent job of maintaining overall composure. The body does not lean, it doesn't get thrown about that much, and more importantly, as you turn, you can really feel what the front wheels are doing through the steering wheel. Again, that just gives you much greater confidence to carry speed through corners. And so I think that in addition to this being an excellent corner cover, which I will get onto shortly, it's also very, very good at just being a solid, dependable motorway cruiser, which I think is what the majority of customers want from a car like this anyway. Now, make no mistake, the GR Sport Corolla Cross does run that reworked suspension that I mentioned earlier, but again, it is not uncomfortable. I do think that Toyota's engineers, in terms of ride and handling, they must be some of the best in the world, because they've managed to very carefully balance better driving dynamics while not compromising overall comfort. Yes, if you were to compare this back to back with a non-GR Sport model, you will say that that car feels a bit softer, because it is. Whereas in this car, there is a certain degree of focus towards managing body control and also ensuring maximum composure when driving at higher speed. And as a result, it means that when you go over imperfections in the road, the car no longer sort of waves. It just sort of settles down very quickly and allows you to regain the confidence and composure that you had before it was upset by whatever it was on the road. However, this focus on composure does not limit itself only to driving on the motorway or only to high-speed cruising, because if you find a corner, you will be very, very surprised by just how good this car is. Like I mentioned earlier, body control in this car is excellent, and you get a certain degree of communication through the steering wheel, which means that when the mood takes you and you find a particularly nice stretch of road, the Corolla Cross GR Sport absolutely keeps up with what you want of it. It manages to take corners with a certain degree of accuracy that you simply would not expect from a family SUV like this. You'd expect this to be wallowy and soft, but it is absolutely not. And because this suspension is so very carefully balanced between maintaining composure over body control, as well as being able to offer just enough comfort that this interior still feels like an inviting place to be, it means that it maintains grip even through corners where you have particularly patchy surfaces. The Corolla Cross GR Sport is an excellent car to drive, and I was truly stunned by just how good this car is from behind the wheel, because you just don't expect it. Which means that you don't have to look at the Corolla Cross GR Sport with a snide face, because it's not. The GR Sport badge on this car actually means something. And that is saying something for a car that is, again, not particularly expensive, has a hybrid powertrain, and is still able to do daily duty like cruising along the motorway like I am now without any issue whatsoever. And speaking of cruising along the motorway, when you're just sort of doing the daily grind, which I am sort of simulating now, you just want to get to work or get to your destination, then you might call upon this car's advanced driver assist features. Now, the Corolla Cross GR Sport comes with the full gamut of Toyota's safety sense, which means that you essentially get level 2 semi-autonomy. That means things like autonomous emergency braking, blind spot monitoring, adaptive cruise control with traffic jam assist, you get lane centering, etc., which means that, again, for the most part, the car is able to do the majority of the work. Now, Toyota's ADAS systems are among the very best in the industry, which is why, as I'm driving along here talking to you, I have my adaptive cruise control running. Of course, my hands are on the steering wheel because duh. But I am not questioning this car in the slightest. I know that this car will faithfully drive me to my next appointment without any fuss at all. And I know that it'll modulate the accelerator and the brakes in a very natural way, in a way that doesn't make me feel uncomfortable in the cabin. Which means that, again, you're just in a really solid, really well-sorted car. And then we get onto this car's fuel consumption, which I suspect is why anyone would choose a Corolla Cross hybrid over the non-hybrid, since obviously this car is also a little bit more expensive. Now, I've driven this car over the last 4 or 5 days, and during that time, I haven't used eco mode once. It's just been set on normal, and I've just allowed the car to manage things. I'm not screwing around with EV mode or trying to force it to charge or whatever. I'm just saying the car do its thing, because that's exactly what Toyota bills it as. It's supposed to be the sort of car that is efficient without you having to try. And so with my driving through the usual testing that we subject to all of the cars that we take on test, this car is returning an average of 5.6 liters to the 100. 5.6, which is incredible for, again, a car that is big enough for you to put your family in the back, carry all their stuff in the boot, and still carve up a mountain road with the sort of composure that you would not expect from a family SUV. To me, that just seems great. It's like you really can have your cake and eat it too, because this car is excellent to drive while still offering excellent fuel economy. I do not see where there is a compromise within this package, except in terms of refinement. Now, I suspect that this is down to the fact that this car uses Toyo Proxys CR1 tires. These are relatively high performance tires because I imagine that according to Toyota, they think that their customers, people buying cars like this, would want excellent grip, and they're willing to make a certain degree of compromise in terms of refinement. Unfortunately, the Toyota Corolla Cross has never been the most refined thing in the world. It's never been the most quiet car to drive. In fact, I think the Corolla Saloon is quieter still. And the Corolla Cross GR Sport suffers from exactly the same issues. As soon as you hit about 90 kilometers an hour, if you're on a piece of road that isn't freshly tarmacked, there is quite a lot of road noise that comes into this cabin. It is a constant hum in here, and you can never really run away from it. This is also made worse by the fact that at 110, 120 kilometers an hour, in addition to the road noise, you also have to deal or contend with quite a bit of wind noise, and that comes from kind of where the side mirrors are housed. There is quite a lot of, it sounds very blustery, kind of in your 3/4 view here, which does mean that, again, from behind the wheel, you do get quite a lot of noise intrusion into the cabin. Now, mercifully, this isn't exactly the end of the world, because if you were to compare this to vehicles like, say, the Proton X50, or in fact the X70 for that matter, you will find that the X70 perhaps is a little bit quieter, but the X50 is about the same as this, which means that all things considered, this is basically what you should expect. It's no noisier than the competition. It's not notably noisier. It's just that it's not necessarily as quiet as you might initially expect. But I don't see that as a detraction against the Corolla Cross. I think this is still an excellent car. And when you pair this entire package to that incredible powertrain as well as the reworked suspension, you just end up in a car that is really, really likable. I cannot stress this enough. This car is just so easy to live with on a day-to-day basis because it just drives so well. It offers great fuel economy. You have a great ADAS suite that you can trust on a daily basis. And it just makes this car likable. Really, really likable. For lack of a better word, it's just a really likable package. And I do think that there is some justification in buying the GR Sport model over the non-GR Sport, simply because this car drives notably better than the non-GR Sport model, enough to justify that expense, enough to justify that, because I think that if you do fashion yourself a keen driver, you will appreciate the way this car manages itself, because it does so very, very well indeed. However, if you're not all that fast when it comes to driving dynamics, etc., frankly, the Corolla Cross hybrid on its own is already a very adept machine. You'd be very happy in a car like that every day if you're not too concerned about driving dynamics. If you're not the sort of person who sees a mountain road as a potential fun activity over a weekend, then don't bother with the GR Sport, just get the regular Corolla Cross hybrid. But I would like to point out one little thing. The Corolla Cross hybrid as a whole, not just the GR Sport, these cars are very, very efficient on the motorway because of how the HEV system handles itself and how it pushes power back and forth, etc. But if the majority of your commute or the majority of your usage is on the motorway, then at that point, the hybrid system might not necessarily be the best partner for you. Simply because if you're just cruising on the motorway, you might prefer a slightly brawnier, a slightly meteor, fully turbocharged engine, which means that if that's what you're doing and you'd appreciate a slightly quieter, more refined cabin, and again, you don't really care about driving dynamics, then there is also the Proton X70. Although that said, in order to get to an X70 now, you're also giving up a nice leather, a decent interior, and you'll be running on GT tires because Proton thinks that traction is a luxury. But overall, I do think that the Toyota Corolla Cross GR Sport that we have now, as it stands now, is an excellent, excellent car. I cannot recommend this enough to the sort of people who simply do not have the option to charge at home or the option to charge at work, and you just want something that's simple. If you're looking for a car that is fun to drive and does not require any sort of lifestyle change while still being able to offer the sort of fuel efficiency that you want, particularly in these trying times as energy is as expensive as it's ever been, then I think that the Corolla Cross GR Sport just makes a whole lot of sense. And so this is most definitely worth a look if you're shopping within the segment. In any case, that concludes our review of the 2026 Toyota Corolla Cross GR Sport HEV. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon to notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All the links are in the description below, including the link to join our new WhatsApp channel so that you stay up to date with all the news from us. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and jangan bodoh.